Hi, my name is Bob Greenier, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So how is everyone this 19th of November 2024, when we will be discussing O-Day, Make and Break. So can everyone hear me? Hello, we need DWC, we nerd, Crypto Alchemist, Estonias, Mik Aviala, Humberto Dias, Quad 10, Stuart 10, Athenavac, Samuel Keeley, indeed. Are you really Samuel Keeley? Ken Pratt, Muggle 1, Harry, DIY Projects with Chowsis. We got the Australian contingent in the room. Sam McInnes, Nick Knock. Lovely. I think Gordon might have left us. He gave up on me. Hi, Jack Carter, William Bont. Some new names in the house. This is great. Hi, Matthew Reynolds. Thank you. Hi, Nick Moore, MEF. Hi, Steve A. How are we all? Hi, D2105. You can't see you, though. Well, that's because I'm not sharing me. I've got a different setup because I'm on the road here. I am actually here. Hello, this is me. I am here. Different background. Can you see that? You heard voices from the other room. Yes, there are voices in the other room. It's a bit tedious, but it's a hotel room. What can we say? So there we go. So what am I got this on the screen for? Well, quite apart from the fact that Adobe's AI refused to generate anything like this at all for about an hour. And I had to use Grok to generate parts of it and then use Adobe AI to extend it. But I'm quite happy with the image. It kind of gets across what I wanted, which is the male force destroying things and being fire and sun and that kind of thing, and the female force being the condenser, the water and the ice rather than the plasma and the gases. And so make is what we have here on the left here. Actually turn off the image, I can show you my mouse. Make here is our woman, our yin force, and break is our male, our yang force. Okay, so thank you. We got a good quorum in the house here, 84. It's a good start. Sorry for those that were waiting. But essentially, what I have to talk to you about is something that I need to talk to you about. And it's like not ideal, but I have to talk to you about it because I may be meeting someone in the next day. And if that happens, I don't want there to be any doubt that I had already said certain things before I met the person. So there's that. And so that is why I have decided to re-engage with a generalized idea for a solution to the new, as I call it, eternal fire. And that is what we are going to quickly go over today. Yes, Jamal says expansion and contraction. That's the kind of thing that we are going to be talking about here. Well, I'm going to be putting a paper together. It's going to be very rough, and I will update it on my ResearchGate over a period of time. It might even have 0 references on the first draft, but you'll know all the references that need to go in there. And as I mentioned things today, it'd be great if people out there could drop into the blog the references, and it's a little bit of homework for you. Help me help you is the goal here. And yeah, so how do I do this? It's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so okay. Yeah, so what I want to do is talk about how we can capture energy from the vacuum, how we can manipulate matter to generate various forms of technological useful energy, and really be quite simple. I'm glad the sound is good for you, Corky. Excellent. This is good news. So I'm going to go over my little introduction here. which will be the basis for the abstract in the paper. But I said this, I believe, in May, around about May, or whenever it was my Copenhagen presentation in 2017. And it was an understanding that I got from one Dr. Stoyan Sargachev, who I think visited me in 2015. He has a book called Basic Structures of Matter, Supergravitational Theory. He notes that the Tesla ball with the streamers, the one that you know and love, actually is something that has charge clusters in it. And in that presentation, I actually called it matter manipulation. Matter manipulation, that was the name of the presentation back then. And I shared in the blog today another presentation, text presentation that I gave on my Steemit blog, the Homo Symbian blog, back about six and a half, maybe as much as nearly 7 years ago, where I introduced for the first time this concept of make and break. And what I had realized is that the technology, it gives you this wonderful array of things you can do with it, but in terms of making practical energy from it, if you push it too hard, it will get to a point where it consumes all matter, and there's nothing you can do about that. It will consume all matter. So on that basis, I need to go. Let me do this. Oh no, it's going to mess up. Anyway, I'm going to start reading this. So essentially, I learned this from Stoyan Sargachev, and essentially it was that all energy, chemical, nuclear, etc., is as a result from the reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum. And very simply, the Casimir effect is a simple example of this process in action. Okay, thank you very much, Vanilla Isis. So just to say that again, and I'm gonna zoom out on my camera here so I can wave my arms around. You do that. So then I can wave my arms around and you can see me gesticulating. Okay, let's try that. Okay, sorry, I'm in a hotel room and this is very impromptu, but I have no choice. I have to get it out. Thank you very much for the morning. Wonderful. For a coffee, switch my brain on. Yeah, so essentially all chemical energy, just to repeat this, it's very, very critical. Doesn't matter whether it's chemical, nuclear, or something more exotic. It comes about from the reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum. And one example is the Casimir effect. Okay. So I'm just going to read this introduction here and see what you think. When you condense or cohere sound, light, or matter, it distorts less of the physical vacuum, and so therefore energy is released. This could be in the form of lower frequency photons that can be thermalized, or others that can be utilized, say, photoelectrically. Or more condensed matter, such as electrons, that can be directly harvested, or higher binding energy nuclei, or low energy neutrinos, or clusters thereof, with kinetic energy that can be thermalized directly or used in subsequent particle-based nuclear reactions. And so this reminds me of the smorgasbord of reactions that is made possible. And if I get it in a minute, just don't go away. I'm gone away now. It's trying to chase me over here in my hotel room. It's lost me again. Hello, I'm over here. Come here. There we go. Right. Matsumoto book remake, I hope will launch on the 24th. I had to redate everything because I just got released from jury duty yesterday. But Matsumoto did a very complicated diagram of all of the things that he thought was possible with the process that involved ball lightning. And he has a large graph here, which you can see it's on page 46. And depending on where you are in the process, you can have all kinds of outcomes. And it's what's traditionally made it very, very complicated to understand for people. Okay, so I'm hoping that will be launching on the 24th, assuming it gets approved. So then it will run to the 24th for 1 month. 2 24s make 48. And it's 24, 12, 24. And yeah, that camera's wild. Okay. Yeah, so basically, just to repeat that second sentence of the abstract. When you condense or cohere sound, light, or matter, it distorts less of the physical vacuum and energy is released. This could be in the form of lower frequency photons that can be thermalized, or others that can be utilized photoelectrically, or more condensed matter, such as electrons that can be directly harvested, or higher binding energy nuclei, or lower energy nuclear reactions, or clusters thereof, with kinetic energy that can be thermalized or used in subsequent particle-based nuclear reactions. The formation of higher binding energy is result of condensation. I'll say that again. The formation of higher binding energy is the result of condensation. I've said this before, but I'm going to reiterate it here to try and be very, very clear. Essentially what I'm saying to understand this is that consider plasma, gas, liquid, and solid. They're all condensed matter. They're all considered condensed matter. Yes, even a plasma is considered a condensed form of condensed matter. However, as you move from plasma down to a gas, you have to give up energy for that condensation process to occur. When you move from gas to a liquid, everyone's felt this when the dry steam has hit their hand from a kettle, for instance, it has to give up energy in order to condense from the gas to a liquid. When you're going from a liquid to a solid, again, you have to give up energy. That water, when it turns to ice, it has to give up energy in order to form that crystal. At each stage, energy must be given up as the matter condenses. William Schwann says, plasma is just gas with an electric current in it. Well, plasma is some neutral ions, some positive and some negative ions, and some free electrons. That's generally what you consider as plasma. Yes, Nick Knott, these are phase changes. And there is a phase change below solid matter, it would appear, that we gain access to in this process. And Ken Shoulders refers to this as binding energy that exceeds all known ordinary condensed matter. And that, he says, leads to novel forms of nuclear reactions. And this would also explain why you see these toroids moving around on Bogdanovich et al.'s late 2010s paper on plasma flow electric discharge, where he saw the toroids moving around for 2 days on the metal after the experiment. That is potentially this exotic vacuum object, this microball lightning structure, which is a higher condensation state than even solid matter. And we'll come into that. Now, consider if you had a method to convert dark energy. Right, now, let me go and get Parkamov's book, which is over here. It's going to chase me around the room. Hello, I'm over here. It's lost me. Somewhere here, Parkamov's book. Honest to God, I do. No, it's in a different bag. I mean, it's like, come here. I do have it in a different bag. I think. Yeah. Okay. All right. There we go. So, in Space Earth Human, he has a chart about the generally accepted, although there's lots of people that complain, no, it's not this, not that, but whatever. That your normal luminous matter, it's on page 67 for those that had it. It's this chart here. Okay. The luminous matter, stars and gas are about 0.4%. That's like everything you can ordinarily see. If you add in the non-luminous matter, the dark clouds of plasma, and the black holes in the whole universe, that's another 3.6%. So those two together are 4%. The dark matter, including neutrinos, is 22%. 22%. So 5.5 times more than all of the luminous and black holes and everything in the galaxy. And then over and above that, there is dark energy, and dark energy constitutes a whopping 74% of the energy in the universe. Okay, so consider if you had a method to convert dark energy, ultra-high frequency vibrations in the physical vacuum into photons, then photons into background or relic neutrinos, and then background relic neutrinos into ordinary matter. At each stage of condensation, there would be a reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum, and energy would be released in a form that may be accessible in the physical world in which we live. I'll repeat that. Now consider if you had a method to convert dark energy, ultra-high frequency vibrations in the physical vacuum into photons, then photons into background relic neutrinos, and then background relic neutrinos into ordinary matter. At each stage of condensation, or it could be into electrons, or it could be into normal baryonic matter via their substituent contents. At each stage of condensation, there would be a reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum, and energy would be released, possibly in a form that may be accessible in the physical world in which we live. Never are you making something out of nothing. At the very least, you are, because E equals mc squared, and matter can be described as a wave and as a particle. So it's definitely at least a wave, and some people say it's trapped light, and we'll come on to that. That if you can convert some of the dark energy here, in its energy, into matter, dark matter, and then into condensed matter that we can interact with, non-dark matter, matter that responds to electromagnetic waves, then you are manifesting metal, or material rather. So to go on, this is interesting, my next word, or two words. To manifest from the practically infinite energy that surrounds us, we need a method to focus, cohere, and condense energy in all its forms into a more condensed state in order to distort the physical vacuum less, such that technologically useful energy and matter forms are produced. The structure that manifests itself as natural ball lightning is, for me, the prototype of the tool that permits this process. This author has established, by way of experiment, observation, and synthesis of a wide array of third-party observations, that when the physical vacuum and/or elementary inductor capacitor LC dipoles, which are background relic neutrinos, that is the terms given to them by Shishkin, Karols, and Dubovik before he passed. So LC, inductor capacitor dipoles, if you can imagine, you've got an induction coil going around in a loop and a capacitive dipole, and then if they are in oscillation out of phase, you end up with an anapole, which is a special case of the toroidal moment. So, to go back, this author has established by way of experiment, observation and synthesis a wide array of third-party observations that when the physical vacuum and/or elementary inductor capacitor LC dipoles, that's background or relic neutrinos, experience extreme magnetohydrodynamic shear, it leads to the formation of vacuum currents that self-organize into fractal toroidal electrodynamic structures that possess a fractal toroidal moment. These fractal toroidal moments produce torsional beams in the physical vacuum that interact with anapole and toroidal moment bearing matter. Okay, so if we can go back and look at the Zverblis paper. The Zverblis paper is saying that when you extend Maxwell's equations, you go EH, and you get these fractal toroidal electrodynamic structures, they produce a closed Poynting vector. And if you have at least a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, you have a closed Poynting vector and another closed Poynting vector that's in a loop. And they state that in that form, the Poynting vector is able to capture photons. That is if you then are causing the production of photons by polarizing the physical vacuum in material and then producing positron electron pairs and then them annihilating or whatever, that would be one way to capture energy. But there are photons all around us, and so being able to capture the photons and accrue that energy in the core leads to energy building up to a point where it might be upgraded into ordinary matter, things that we can utilize in our what I call meat space. The fractal toroidal moment is able to produce fractal topological monopole structures, the phase singularities of which can cohere and condense photons, elementary inductor capacitor dipoles, and all forms of dark and visible matter. The phase singularity results in a magnetic core that ultimately no matter or light can resist, and the overall structure bears a gravitational azimuth that leads to further clustering of similar structures until matter can be gravitationally collapsed. The result is any remaining trapped energy is ultimately recycled. It is this author's hypothesis that all novel energy systems, all life itself, including non-traditionally considered forms of life, like the Earth, other planets, stars, plasma clouds, etc., use this process of net negative entropy, yin, to live. The structures have yang forms, which are necessary in our universe to keep the overall balance. So, essentially that would be the preamble. And then I am going to go into a rough overview of what will be the sort of formula. And this would require almost every other word to be referenced. So essentially, it appeared that I was going to be coming here to Rome to do what I'm going to do here. And I needed to get something out on the record. This is very messy, I know. But I wrote something yesterday morning, and I wrote the introduction, which I've just given you, which will be the basis of the first part of the paper on the train up to the airport. Okay, so O-Day, a make and break, a generalized solution to the new eternal fire. Essentially, you've got to trigger production of clusters with disruptive discharge, grow those clusters with phase conjugated EM and break them before they get too aggressive. So you need to make them, grow them, and break them. And Ken Shoulders was very clear about these things. He says, I make these itty bitty tiny things like this. So he says something like that. And I grow them and I grow them and I keep them there. And, you know, if he puts too much in, they'll blow up and go nasty. But he can let them fade away and then grow them again and fade away and grow them again and stuff. And this is kind of what you have to do. And so anyway, listening, guys, this is going to be talking. There's going to be properties and particle or molecules that are going to be missed out here. But like I say, that I was just roughing it yesterday. Okay. So, high intensity, short duration pulsed, that is disruptive electric discharge or other intense mechanical shockwave of over 5 electron volts per atom through water vapor, water or hydrogen isotope, and that would account for ball lightning, tornadoes, Hutchison effect, Kladoff cavitation, Griggs cavitation, Huang cavitation, Bogdanovich plasma flow discharge, Leclerc cavitation, Marsa cavitation, Adamenko plasma relativistic discharge, Bostic plasma toroids, abbreviated to plasmoids, and Stanley Myers laser-induced clusters or other forms that he used in his system. It's a generalized approach, and a calculation for 5 electron volts comes from a presentation that I translated from Alexander Shishkin, Karols and Dubovik, and you can see that on remoteview.icu. So look up Shishkin, and you can go and see where they calculate the necessary energy there. Okay. So, 1, you need to disassociate the water. And so you can get, whatever is it, H3O plus or something, I don't know, H minus, OH minus, atomic hydrogen, O minus. All of these things were in the analysis of a Mars gas. Then what you need to do too is properly break the atomic hydrogen into protons, electrons, and magnetotoroelectrical radiation. This is, according to Shishkin, Korol, and Dubovik, a already clustered toroidal structure made of relic neutrinos, or what they call background neutrinos. So these are things that have already been condensed into that ordinary matter when that ordinary matter was condensed out of other less condensed energy forms. And what you're doing is releasing what the 1992 paper that I rebuilt from the CIA archive said was this hidden energy within matter. And I think this comes originally from the observations of Ivan Filimonenko in the 1950s when he did under the secrets of the Soviet Union, they did a palladium deuterium boiling water reactor. And they found that it emitted a form of radiation that would cause the change of rate of decay of radioactive isotopes. That was in the 1950s. The person is Ivan Filimonenko. So they already knew about this, and it was Ivan Filimonenko that was one of the parties that came out and did some of the early replication work in the Soviet Union when Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons came out in 2009. And this paper I'm referring to is Flight to Alpha Centauri. So you can go and look at that on the blog. But essentially, we have this definition of magnetotoroelectrical radiation that is the etheric matter, this radiant energy, in my view, that Tesla observed. And we will have a sample of a radiant energy affected piece of material to test under SEM to see if it produces the same observed transmutations. Okay. Now, in a system where you've got a lot of electrical and impact energy going on, the OH minus will self-maze. That is to say that it'll start resonating and it'll lead to microwave radiation being produced by the OH minus. Okay, and this is known to occur in interstellar gas, with ambient excitation producing microwave radiation. 4. Microwave standing waves force aggregation of magnetotoroelectrical radiation, which lead to fractal toroidal moment, and then the emitter is energized. The magnetotoroelectrical radiation is energized. Okay, so the standing waves in the system, there'll always be some interfering waves and some nodes and antinodes. And according to Kapitsa, that's what you need for the formation of, in a moist air environment of which this will be, that's what you need for the formation of the initial structures of ball lightning, although he doesn't know or didn't say about the fractal toroidal structures that it seems to contain. 5. Magnetotoroelectrical radiation, their FTM, fractal toroidal moments, produce an EM phantom, an electromagnetic phantom, or vacuum current at the core, the magnetic core at the phase singularity. Okay, so the electromagnetic phantom came from the Zverblis and Nevesky papers, 1993, I think, or 92 for Nevesky, and 1995 for Zverblis, from this fractal toroidal electrodynamic structure. And that vacuum current is the thing that can cohere photons and capture photons, which enables them to do essentially zero-point energy capture. According to David Freiberger from SLAC, the same electrodynamic structure will lead to a diality angle, as he calls it, that exceeds the ability of ordinary baryonic matter to keep its reference with the Dirac sea, and the normal baryonic matter falls apart. So what you could end up with in the core is one intense energy cluster. Okay. So, like I say, this entire bullet points will be in this first draft of the paper, which I hope to drop in the next day or two. Okay. And it's going to be very rough and no references, and you can knock yourself out by finding the references. It'll be done in time. Magnetotoroelectrical radiation fractal toroidal moments produce a non-radiating boundary with at least one principal focused beam of torsion at the base of its n-level tor, when there are at least 4 n-1 tors, where matter and energy can be ingested or exhaled, but anyway, ingested in a yin form, and a high-frequency gravitational wave azimuth which projects through the structure out in front of its n-level tor in the direction of travel. We know this because we caught it on camera in video that was sent by David Boutlier in a Vega experiment. If you recall, there were particles that in their forward direction, there were already orbiting self-similar particles moving around their forward direction or changing direction when they weren't actually next to each other and they weren't caring about the electric or magnetic fields in the tank. So they were impervious to electromagnetic fields, but they were able to, within an event horizon, self-organize. And in yet another video, these are called extreme interactions or something on my blog, you can see where one comes out, it gets negatively charged, it comes round using the magnetic field, and then other ones pop out and then they start being captured and going into phase and traveling with the one that's going out, having fallen into its event horizon. And eventually you get 3 that are orbiting around each other until they decohere and start moving away from each other. So, and this is because of this gravitational beam. There's a paper by Rodionov, which I translated and put on my blog, called On Dark Matter Threads. And they talk about the neutrino rocket and how this interaction with background neutrinos and its interaction with reactions in the core allow it to travel in this direction on this like neutrino flux that goes through it. But anyway, relic neutrinos are a model of gravity according to Bob McElrath and 2008-2009 CERN theory group. And so it projects this beam out in the azimuth. Now, of course, if you look at John Archibald Wheeler's 1954 paper on geons, he's saying an electromagnetic wave going around one wave and a counter wave. So that's phase conjugated electromagnetic waves, one going one way, one going the other. They are lead to magnetic bubbles and electric fields in between in a standing wave arrangement, and that is held together by the gravitational azimuth. So you can kind of understand it by looking at John Archibald Wheeler's Geons paper. And so it's something along those lines. You can imagine you just got one electron going around that way and one electron going around that way, and you're ending up by producing this Cooper pair, and this is what forms at the middle of these fractal toroidal moment structures. And so you get coherence of electrons and condensation of electrons as per the Lockheed Martin systems and methods for generating coherent matter waves. Okay, so 7. Fractal toroidal moment and resulting magnetic core interacts with magnetic, paramagnetic matter, ultimately all matter, by way of their anapole, which is a special case of the toroidal moment, including relic neutrinos. 8. Some matter is focused to the core and captured by it. Other matter, such as electrons and ions, may get trapped in orbit through the core. Some might get stuck at the non-radiating boundary. Some of those orbiting may be captured later. And moreover, some small clusters that are pulled in may end up orbiting around the whole structure. 9. Other self-similar structures can be pulled in and aggregate or be attracted by their fractal toroidal moments to the non-radiating boundary of the large structure. And this is what we see in the broken sort of I called it like a horse chestnut broken out, which I shared at my presentation in Strasbourg, where you had little toroids inside of what appeared to be titanium-rich material. And then on the boundary layer, you had this iron-rich crenellation sort of material, but it had a golden ratio between 2 different areas. And you can imagine that if you looked at the cut, the 15 millimeter cut in the Henk-Urien Vega experiment in the copper pipe, when we looked at the boundary layer, it had these scallop sections out, these spherical scallop sections out, but all over the place it had these hexagonal, twisted, churned areas going through it. And so I can imagine that the outside of the ball lightning structure is where some of the ball lightning that has been attracted in, and then it's got caught on the non-radiating boundary. It is attracted to the structure, but it can't go inside. It gets like part the way inside. So you get this golden ratio skin on the outside. And when that forms, it can form very, very quickly. It can make that a spherical section, a bit like Terminator, disappear from whatever material it's interacting with, as we saw in the Henk-Uren experiments. And so, it's a very compelling argument where we see these things. And when you look at the work of Leonid Ryzhkev in exploding titanium foil, he produces a big ball lightning, and then the big ball lightning falls apart into lots of little smaller ball lightnings after a short period of time, very short period of time, in fact. And so you can imagine that this forms, and then it has this cluster around it, all these different clusters around it, and then the non-radiating boundary collapses, the internal big structure fails, and so the little ones that are stuck on the outside fall away. And so that would easily explain the phenomenon there. And if you actually look at the image that I shared in the trailer video for the work of Dr. Matsumoto, if you look at the top of the page that I panned up to in his sketches of the various properties of microball lightning, the actual unbroken microball lightning, it's a sphere and it has loads of little tori all over it. And so I think he had seen this. And of course, we've seen this physically and apparently captured on video by Bogdanovich. So I think we've got a pretty good idea that how the outer sphere type structures can form. So to go back to that 9, other self-similar structures can be pulled in and aggregate in the core or be attracted by their fractal toroidal moments to the non-radiating boundary of a larger structure. 10. Matter is collapsed in the core by the process of electronuclear collapse into an electronuclear macrocluster. That's the terms used by S.V. Adamenko. A quark electron soup, the term used by Ken Shoulders. An itonic cluster, the term used by Takaaki Matsumoto. And possibly even a pure photonic structure. That is just pure photon trapped in there. Loads of photons just trapped in the core. A vacuum current, a pure vacuum current, just incredible energy. 11. Matter, including formally dark matter and photons. All photons, including far IR, visible, UV, radio wave, X-ray, gamma, is condensed in this core and subcores with sufficient fractality, allowing for new protons and new condensed ordinary baryonic matter to be produced. I'll say that again. If you take an electron and a positron and you collide them together and they annihilate, they produce 2 photons, 2 gamma rays, which are exactly and precisely the energy of the mass of the electron and the positrons, 511 keV, right? That's why you need, on the alien reproduction vehicle, 1.2 million volts, because that exceeds 1.022 million volts, which allows for polarization of the physical vacuum. Okay. Right. 12. Matter can be mechanically fed into the event horizons. One method is to use sound, another diffusion, and you can perhaps enhance this by doing pressure pulses. Okay, so if you have one of these structures, as we know, in the Henk-Uren, for instance, example, and also in Hutchison samples, and also in Matsumoto samples, inside the metal, you have a spherical piece of material completely removed. Now, if the active structure is still there, the way you would feed that is you put sound, and as you put sound and it pushes those atoms into the event horizon, they'll be consumed. So that's easier when you've got a gas in place, because like if you've got a ball lightning and it's stuck in location, it can only consume the things that come to it, right? Feng shui for ball lightning. Feel for the poor ball lightning. Okay. 13. Energy in the form of photons is released during matter condensation, and this drives the fractal toroidal moment of the structure, allowing for a self-sustaining of the process. Okay? So when you have condensation, it produces energy. The energy can then keep the process going. So the idea that Kapitz is saying that 150 meter nuclear blast, that only lasts for 10 seconds. So a ball lightning that's only a centimetre across or a foot across. That shouldn't be lasting more than a very small fraction of 1 second, but sometimes they can last for minutes. And so it must have, his idea was you were feeding it energy from afar, and that's probably what was occurring during, for instance, the Foo Fighters during the Second World War. They were being produced, but like they were not quite natural born lightning. They might have achieved self-sustaining nature, but it might have been the case that many of them didn't do that. Okay. I would argue that the ones my father showed me in 1979 likely projected or synthesized from Shoreham Airfield, the oldest purpose-built air base in the world, was actually as a result of interfering fields, a bit like the Kapitsa idea, and they hadn't reached a state of self-sustaining, because when the they just turned off. They just immediately turned off. Right, so like instantaneously. So there's another option. They could have moved them instantaneously out of sight, or they could have overdriven them to blow up. And they kind of did flash out, but they just disappeared as fast as you can imagine something disappearing. Okay. So 14. Structures with less than 6 NTORs will be driven to self-organize into 6 TOR or more structures if they have provision of or otherwise get access to more matter and light to condense. When a structure has exhausted all of the matter within its event horizon, or within the event horizon reach of its torsion beams, of which there can be 2 to 5 sub-beams and always one principal, the fractal toroidal moment will fail, and new baryonic matter may be born explosively as Coulomb repulsion takes over. And we see this in Evo Blaster, this video that I shared very, very early on from Henk Uren. He sent me this video and I said, thanks for this video. There's something really special going on here. And you see these explosions and they produce a big bright flash, and the bottom of the chamber is, it would appear, instantaneously cooled, and you can see it regaining its thermal energy. And this is the condensed electrons have emitted a lot of energy as they have formed the charge cluster, and when they get maybe overdriven because they hit the cathode, they get overdriven on the cathode, they then blow up, and all the ordinary the electrons get their ordinary Coulomb repulsion back, the Pauli exclusion principle, and they fly out. And as they fly out, they are a charge moving over an area, so that, and they move out spherically. They produce an electromagnetic pulse, which we could observe as outside of the ion chamber. So the EMP made the AM radio go pop, and we saw the flash. But of course, the flash goes out to a distance, and it's a cold explosion. That is, things moving away from each other because they are Pauli exclusion principle, but it's actually cold. As it does that, it's cold. Okay. Because it's absorbing thermal photons from the environment as the electrons are regaining their ordinary balance with the surrounding thermal bath. Okay. So, if a structure is overfed energy or captures too much energy, and its n-1 TOR reaches 48 substructures, or any substructure reaches more than 48 substructures, it may become unstable and fracture, producing many more structures that will self-organize or break apart. Those that survive long enough to be able to stabilize and be fed more energy or have access to more matter or photons may continue to grow and form more stable structures. So what I'm suggesting is, if you can remember this kind of aluminum boat, Hutchison effect, and he's got the frequencies going and nothing is seen, and then when he turns off the power, these kind of fizzing, glowing plasma structures move around on the boat. So what I'm thinking is going on there is that the phase conjugation of the electromagnetic waves are locking the vacuum currents in place, these fractal toroidal moment, magnetotoroelectrical clusters, in place. They're building and they're building and they're building. And then he releases the confinement field interference, and they then are able to move around and feed on actual material, and they become unstable, or they produce these little plasma puffs going on. If you can imagine, you get a structure that gets too big when it's being fed energy, and it's fed in energy in an environment where it's got access to normal baryonic matter, or it's got access to gas flows or whatever, then it consumes so much energy that it produces so many substructures that it breaks and divides. I believe that this is what's going on in the ball lightning that leads the discharge channel of lightning. And this is a theory of Ken Shoulders, which I firmly subscribe to. And I added to that by saying that what happens when it gets too much energy in there, the thing literally divides. It's like a living organism dividing into two, right? It multiplies, and that produces your branches in your lightning. So you've got one ball lightning coming down here with producing the discharge channel, and then it gets too much energy and it splits it. So you've got 148 in Tor here, and it tries to go to 49, and it splits into 224 here, and then the substructures start building up, and that is a branch in your lightning, in my view. You can see this in the video that I shared of Matsumoto, where there's a ball and then it splits and it goes off and eats more, and you can see this in various Hank urine experiments as well. So I firmly believe that this is what's going on. They can be initiated, they can grow, and they can subdivide. They can be locked into place and be kept stable. But then if they're allowed to roam around and do what they want, then they can then consume matter and produce what you see in those various Hutchison effects. Okay. So, though absent of a source of matter and or photons, the remaining electromagnetic phantoms and vacuum currents will become dormant after about 48 hours. They may still exist in metals or bound to oxygen, for instance, but they will need to be fed photons at least to become active again. And this was observed by Neil Crichton Gold, sadly departed. He was able to reproduce the radiation emissions from his previously run reactor just by heating it up to 800 degrees, letting it cool down and putting it in with some X-ray film. When I told this to Baranov and Zatalepin, they said, we did a lot more with our bismuth salts. We took it outside after 18 months and exposed it to sunlight, and then it started to produce strange radiation tracks again. So once these things are formed, and this is stated by Ed Lewis, they can persist in metals for a very long time, and Ken Shoulders said indefinitely. And so with, for instance, Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator, we know from the fact that it's producing iron-rich crenellated spheres and the signatures that were observed by Matsumoto that at some point it has been able to produce these structures, and that once there, the metal is conditioned, and so it can effectively be re-heightened by photons. And what is thermal energy, if not infrared photons? So the infrared photons, I've already told you in the work of Neil Crichton Gold, were able to re-stimulate these structures into a state of activation, and that would happen very, very quickly in an internal combustion engine. Okay, so 18. Phantoms and their torsion fields can be disrupted by disruptive discharges. Right. This is something that Alexander Shishkin said privately in a meeting in Sochi in 2018 that I was there, but also he said it more recently in a paper, and I'm going to be translating that paper, but essentially it is this: that if you have a torsion field caused by these structures in an environment, it's not good for biological life, and that you can correct that by having high intensity discharges, and basically disorders the environment, right? So that you don't have a cohering structure in there that can cohere energy out of you. These things do sound like magic, but I'm afraid they're real, and we need to be aware of them moving forward. Okay, so Uh, okay. 19. If a structure's gravitational high frequency, sorry, if the structure's gravitational azimuth, high frequency gravitational wave, is brought in line with the torsion beams of other structures, they can mesh together into balls and or rings. So if you've got like uh, a not fully closed structure, that is to say, you've got two, three, four, five, or six, you can make a buckyball structure that actually has no tor in the center. It might have had a tor in the center to start with, but then that can go away and you can actually have the sphere. And so, and they're linking with their beam coming through their head and also the sub beams coming out through their sides and the one that comes out the back. So they can mesh into a sort of a fuzzy ball on the outside, and this would again explain the way that the copper spherical section was cut out of the 15 millimeter sample from Henk Uren. I've probably got to write a whole paper on that and just do a load of graphics so people can understand what I'm talking about. But anyway, you know, it's got to do. Right, okay. The sphere would present like buckyballs. So these kind of mesh-like structures, which may or may not have a core, would present like a buckyball. And we've seen this in our observation of a Murakami type spark from a spark plug in water vapor, and also in the Bogdanovich long video recordings of long-lived plasmoids. It can produce a kind of buckyball-like structure. I'm saying that the enclosed space may have different vacuum properties. It may be the case that a substrate, such as metal, might allow the sphere to distort to the macro shape of the metal form, allowing the form some remarkable properties, such as exclusion from the action of gravity and inertia, and invulnerability to a range of projectiles, including lasers, to name a few. It would also be frictionless. So what am I saying? I'm saying that you, over your metal surface, over your paramagnetic material, for instance, like aluminium was used by Ralph Ring. Obviously, John Hutchison had some of the most important samples produced with aluminium, the most success with aluminium. And also there's the Salvatore Pais paper, which basically said what I said prior to its release, which was if you take a piezoelectric material, put it on the outside and you hit it then, and with frequencies of RF that are the interatomic distance. And this was based on a 1950s paper that was published in 1963 in New Scientist. You would get the ability for the matter to become macro coherent and effectively weightless. But it could be that just the skin itself allows for the action of gravity to not be able to impact on the material that's trapped inside. And Ken Shoulders, in his interview, which I meticulously transcribed over 2 weeks, way back when, he specifically says that these structures can envelop things. And we have seen this. We have seen this in the fracture sample of John Hutchison. And at the same scale, we saw it in a piece that I called the Jewel from Lion, where all of the other quartz around it was thermally affected. But immediately adjacent, there was an event horizon where you had this, what I called, it was like a petal-shaped piece. And the petal-shaped piece had this skin of these yin-yang structures all over it, and it was not affected in the same way. It was actually it become rose quartz, which implied that it had exposure to X-rays and or beta particles, and we know that these structures, when they're condensing, produce both. And so it's entirely consistent with the observations or claims of Ken Shoulders that this can happen. And if you were to create a craft that would be so designed, you would want a metal on the outside, and you would want something to prevent the X-rays from causing a problem for people on the inside. The X-rays are typically up to 2 kilo electron volts for a condensing exotic vacuum object. And when one blows up, they're typically around about 10 kilo electron volts. So lead would probably be sufficient for this, and the ARV used a sloppy lead paint on the outside, and I think that's probably why. Okay. So yes, the sphere would present like buckyballs. The enclosed space may have different vacuum properties. It may be the case that a substrate such as metal might allow the sphere to distort to the macro shape of the metal form, allowing the form some remarkable properties such as exclusion from the action of gravity and inertia, and invulnerability to a range of projectiles, including lasers. But it also is invulnerable to the friction of air and water. So these things would be able to fly as easily in space as they do in the air and in the oceans. 22. Only scalar beams and similar structures to its composition would be able to disable the shielding effects. This would happen by way of over-energizing the structures and disrupting them. So like I'm saying, if you've got a nice stable set of structures all over this thing, you would have to fire so much scalar energy in, or exotic vacuum object clusters in, to destabilize the overall structure. So in order to interact and disable something with this technology, you need to have a phase conjugated, a focused RF beam of some type, and or a coherent matter wave beam, like is proposed by Lockheed Martin. You would have to have those technologies in place so that you could defend against other people that were using this technology. Okay. Now, I'm stating here it is possible to produce these structures purely electromagnetically, or some of the effects purely mechanically. You can even produce these things mechanically by vibrating metal. And I think they've done this, the group in Italy that did the mercury and aluminium solitrodes, they also vibrated metal and had these ring structures form. And NASA did something and they got these ring structures formed, the same kind of structures we see everywhere. But the Italian group, Cardone et al., they actually were able to produce transmutation just by vibrating metal. Okay. With the above understanding, technologies employing this ultimate tool of nature to produce energy effectively must first initiate them, keep them constrained and charged as they are energized to a point where they are self-feeding. They must be allowed to self-feed for long enough that they produce a net gain when harvested, but not so much that they aggregate and ultimately destroy the apparatus they are stored within. Their binding energy is higher than ordinary matter, and their internal fields can exceed that of chemical bonds and disrupt nuclei and their substructures. Do not expect to contain overdriven structures. Okay, I'm going to repeat that whole paragraph because this is the whole key to these type of technologies, the making and the breaking. Okay, with the above understanding, technologies employing this ultimate tool of nature to produce energy effectively must first initiate them, keep them constrained and charged. You need them charged so that they don't wander off, because if you don't have charge and they become neutral, they can just leave your apparatus. So they need to be charged as they are energized to a point where they are self-feeding, right? Because if you're just putting energy in, like the, Lawrence Livermore, or the laser fusion, the National Ignition Facility, you need to have the thing building up the energy. I mean, they're hoping to get the energy from actual fusion, right? But what I'm suggesting is these structures, you need to get them to a point where they can feed enough on the available thermal energy in the environment, or on the baryonic matter in the environment, or relic neutrinos within their spin field aggregation process, the event horizons for those, so that they can self-feed, and therefore they must be allowed to self-feed for long enough that they produce a net gain when harvested. Now you can think of it like, a society. If you have children, when you're having children, you're at a kind of net loss. For anyone out there that has children, you have to expend your energy and your productive capability to rear that child, okay? And you have to get them to a point where they can feed themselves, yeah? Now, if they feed themselves too much, they'll die, right? But they need to feed themselves enough, and then you need to harvest the productivity from them as a society, okay? And so you can kind of think of it like that, but except if you keep feeding these things, they will keep eating, and then they kind of break up and they can become neutral fragments that come out. So to reiterate that last point, they must be allowed to self-feed for long enough that they produce a net gain when harvested, but not so much that they aggregate and ultimately destroy the apparatus they are stored within. Their binding energy is higher than ordinary matter, and their internal fields can exceed that of chemical bonds and disrupt nuclei and their substructures. Do not expect to contain overdriven structures. This would fully explain, in my view, Castle Bravo producing too much energy. 1. It would fully explain the Pons and Fleischmann ball lightning singularity that made a fist-sized hole in the concrete floor and scared them half to death. They knew it was way beyond nuclear. It would explain the thermocore thermal runaway in a nickel powder hydrogen system in the early 1990s. It would explain the explosion in Mizuno's lab, which he claimed produced a COP of 800. It would explain, although they would vociferously deny it, but it is my opinion that the failure modes in tungsten and molybdenum and other materials used in brilliant light powers reactors, I believe that was caused by this material being formed, which has a higher binding energy than ordinary matter and was able to continuously self-feed on the conductive materials like molybdenum and tungsten. Okay, they were easy to feed on because they're conductive. Okay, and I believe that's why, after I suggested the use of boron nitride and graphite, that they had success in containing that material. They might have whatever they think is going on in their reactor, and that might lead to a technologically useful technology, and that's fantastic. But they are doing exactly what is necessary also to produce exotic vacuum objects and ball lightning, and therefore micro ball lightning. So they have to account for these things being made in their device, even if they really, really don't want them to be there, in my view. So Ken Shoulders in the early, I think 2006, gave a presentation to cold fusion researchers in MIT, and he referred to John Hutchison, his latest work, and the work of S.V. Adamenko. And he said that you really can't practically make a thermal heat generation system out of this, because by the time you're getting to thermal heat generation, you're causing some damage to your reactor. But there are means by which you can gain electrons and maybe light out of the process and do work from that. And so that is really, I believe, he's told us what to do, and I believe that's the direction we need to go in. Okay, so I have 12 points, and this is to use this technology in a system that will be stable and practical. 1. Correct reactants. A source of hydrogen and oxygen is desirable. Can anyone think of a source of hydrogen and oxygen? 2. A containment structure. For instance, if controlled well, the core could be a sapphire tube, but more preferably, it would be a clear covalent ceramic. It could be quartz as well, but you would need to contain it well. Okay? You need to control it well. You need to keep it charged. 3. A means to have electrical, laser, or physical, that is sound or impulse, impacts per atom of over 5 electron volts for hydrogen to lithium to yield base magnetotoroelectrical radiation. So, Shishkin, Kurolz and Dubovik have stated that beyond lithium, which by the way was in Castle Bravo, you need to have over 5 electron volts. For many atoms, it's 2,000 to 4,000 times more than 5 electron volts. So 2,000 would be 10,000 electron volts for other atoms, possibly as much as 20 electron volts in order to initiate this process with atoms beyond lithium. But in Castle Bravo, they had plenty of lithium-7, right? And so lithium-7 could have been impacted and produced a much higher yield. Okay. So, 3. A means to have electrical, laser, or physical, that is sound or impulse, impacts per atom of over 5 electron volts for hydrogen to lithium to yield the base magnetotoroelectrical radiation. This could possibly be cavitation. The intense energy, focused energy, could yield those kind of impacts on target material in order to produce the effective output. 4. A means to energize and aggregate the resulting mix, preferably standing waves, phase conjugated, of sound, phonons, or photons. A means to energize and aggregate the resulting mix, preferably standing waves, that is phase conjugated, of sound, phonons, or photons. 5. A source of free electrons to enable charging of the magnetotoroelectrical radiation such that they can be contained. So Ken Scholder said, like, if you don't keep feeding it electrons, he says that like they like electrons, they become electrons. So like they become an electron. So if you don't keep feeding it, then there's no uncohered electrons orbiting around it. So the overall structure doesn't have a net negative charge to a sufficient degree that you can contain it electromagnetically, or by what Ken Shoulders did when he was utilizing it practically. He would have a guideway in an alumina sheet, and the nascent exotic vacuum object would then cool, but as it was cooling, it would emit electrons, and the electrons would then charge the groove in the alumina sheet, and that would produce a net repulsion so that you could keep it away from contacting material that would then be consumed by the matter. So you need to keep feeding it electrons whilst you're building it. So a source of free electrons to enable charging of magnetotoroelectrical radiation so they can be controlled. So one particular way to do this is, you punch it with a disruptive electrical discharge. You then keep a flow of electrons going in there, like a thermionic emission of electrons, and then you punch it again. And I'll come on to the reason why. Additionally, a means of providing extra electrons by way of the photoelectric effect. So basically, the light that's emitted, or the light that's emitted when electrons interact with, for instance, a charged copper oxide plate, that can emit more electrons and feed it, and you get a multiplication process. And this was in Ken Shoulders' patents as well. A passive means of containment, such as a ceramic that will get charged by emitted electrons. Okay, so I've just explained that. That's 7. 8. A means of disruption, which could be a subsequent electrical disruptive discharge, laser, or proxy electrical, that is sound phonon shockwave, to destroy them. Okay. A means of disruption. So here we're on the break. I've just been talking about the make in steps 1 to 7, and now we're talking about the break, 8. A means of disruption, which could be a subsequent electrical discharge, disruptive discharge, laser, or proxy electrical, that is sound and phonon shockwaves, to destroy them. Okay? So what you've got is you've got an initial pulse, which creates the toroidal cluster, the space charge arrangement. That is cooling. You feed that with continuous electrons, and you feed it with photoelectric effect or field effect emission electrons, field emission electrons. You keep it alive, and then you hit it with another pulse, and you rinse and repeat. And that is basically make and break. Make and break. Don't make and keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it and feeding it until it blows up destructively. Or don't make and let it condense down so that it can fade away into a neutral thing and come out of your apparatus. And maybe get excited elsewhere, like damaging your electrical equipment or doing something in your body which is undesirable. Okay. 9. A duty cycle between initiation and growth to disruption. So, 9. A duty cycle between initiation, 1, growth, 2, and disruption. I don't know why it's doing that. That allows for a net self-accumulation period where more energy or matter is captured from the environment or released from binding energy in matter transformation than is needed to initiate and grow the structures from the whole system. That is, you're not doing what you've got in ITAR, which is you're saying you're going to put some energy in to heat up the plasma, and the amount of thermal energy you're getting out is going to be slightly in excess. But if we add in all of the equipment and running all the equipment and running all of the magnets and everything else, and don't just focus on the thermal energy you're putting in, then you're going to end up with a very massive net negative. No, what you've got to do is initiate these little machines, these little itty bitty creatures. You've got to feed, you've got to nurture them, you've got to keep them in their little home. You've got to keep them. This is kind of like Ken Shoulder's language here. You've got to keep them in their home. Feed them, feed them, feed them. Let them bloom and then harvest them, right? Then harvest them. Yeah. It's kind of like having a forest, you know. If you don't harvest the wood, then it can all get burnt up, or it can rot, or whatever. If you want to make a productive use in and make a technological process from this, you've got to initiate them, feed them, allow them to become self-sufficient and grow, and then take yield from them. So, to reiterate, 9. A duty cycle between initiation and growth to disruption that allows for a net self-accumulation period where more energy or matter is captured from the environment or released from binding energy in matter transformation than is needed to initiate and grow the structures from the whole system. 10. A means of capturing and utilizing traveling substructures that go neutral or are able to travel through the core containment. So if you do have a situation, which you're invariably going to get, of material that is being lost from the core because it becomes neutral, because when you blow it up, there's going to be subfragments that become neutral, okay? You then have a secondary material out there that is able to utilize that. Now, we already know from Ivan Filimenenko, and we also know from Alexander Parkhomov, his work, and we also know from many, many authors. I'll list them all, but not now. A secondary material such as lithium or potassium fluoride or others containing lighter spin nuclides that are known neutron absorbers or paramagnetic materials with high conductivity such as aluminium or tungsten, again encased in a graphite and ceramic, might suffice. So the graphite will thermalize because it is a neutron absorber. So will lithium. Lithium will have an interaction with a neutron. These aren't neutrons, but they are neutral. And for some reason, they interact with neutron absorbers. So lithium, cadmium, gadolinium, cobalt, these things, okay? I think I'm right in saying that. But anyway, neutron absorbers. If I've got any of those wrong, you can go and have a look. Just look it up on Wikipedia. Neutron absorbers. So a means of capturing and utilizing the traveling substructures that have gone neutral or are able to travel through the core containment. A secondary material such as lithium or potassium fluoride, and in the experiments in recent years of Dr. Alexander Parkhomov here, he found that lithium fluoride produced the most thermal yield. And this is not in your reactor, so it's not contaminating the inside of the reactor, but it's capturing this radiation that's coming out that would otherwise be lost, and it's allowing you to get a second bite of the cherry. Okay. 11. Substructures remaining in the reactor core will need to be accounted for by continually adjusting the stimulation and destruction cycle, as they will allow for faster aggregation to functionally beneficial clusters. What I'm saying there is, once you've started initiating this process, there will be latent fragments of clusters that will be captured into newly born clusters, which means there will need to be some monitoring of the system from startup. And then once the reactor's been run a couple of times, it will need even less to initiate the overall process. Okay? So if you imagine you've got a little tube, there's a little bit of source of hydrogen in the overall containment structure, and you've got some disruptive discharges going in there between there, and you've got a DC bias, and you've got some field emission going on to feed it more electrons, and maybe some secondary materials in there to give it some, photoelectric electrons, and so on. And then you pulse it. You need to change your duty cycle and maybe your initiation pulses and so forth. Okay. 12. Applying a controlled magnetic field configuration to the core may allow for more photonic than electronic yield from the apparatus. This is straight out of the now expired patent of Tuchanov, where he creates a ball lightning in a big microwave reactor, and it is the charge of the ball lightning in the microwave reactor that causes it to stay away from the walls, or the quartz walls of the reactor, and this is enables him to produce a stable ball lightning structure. And then in the patent, he shows that by putting a linear magnetic field across it, it stresses it, and the coherent electrons or coherent matter on the outside is forced to release photons. And so you can cause this thing to produce light. So, of course, if it's not producing light, if it's producing light, it's going to produce less electrons. So by changing the intensity of the magnetic field around it, you would be able to shift between producing more electricity and producing more light. And the energy that you will gain will have to be one of those things. And there will be a thermal yield, and the thermal yield will be, and also some fraction of that. So there will be an interplay between thermal yield, electronic current flow yield, and light yield from the system. And these are just all technologically useful forms of energy, but I would think the most useful form is electrons, because we can pass them to somewhere else. And the second most useful form would be light. Okay, so that is essentially what I wanted to say today. And if you've got any questions, I would be very interested in hearing what you have to say. This was O-Day Make and Break. It was literally a presentation in order that I could get out this draft that I wrote yesterday and on the train today of a generalized method for producing practical new eternal fire technology. Okay, so I'm looking at questions. I think a reactor would ideally be small, and you could probably use a basic Arduino controller. So someone's asking, what is the easiest way to reproduce the aluminium putty effect? I might be doing something like that in Canada. And I've been wrong in saying that it is the alignment of Betelgeuse and our Earth and the center of the galaxy. That is a thing, and that does cause a high flux. But the specific thing referenced by Joe Parr is that on the 12th of December, or around the day, few days around that, that's when we have the maximum speed of the Earth through the flux of ether. That is the part of the, or it would equivalently be the maximum flux of relic neutrinos. So we're approaching that now. So I will be looking to do some experiments. I intend to be streaming it. We might look to see if we can replicate Hutchison effects and also some things that Tesla did in the late 1880s, 1890s that has never been replicated since. What is the point of making stable EVOs versus making and breaking? Stable EVOs you get for free. They get stuck in the metals of your reactor, and they can be initiation points. So, for instance, when you look at the the Sapphire project or the projects before then that actually produced these balls of fire, these hemispherical structures over a substrate. They are kind of like the vacuum structure, in my view, is embedded in the center of that. And it's very interesting. If you go and look at the launch video for the remaking of Matsumoto's book, I was absolutely blown away in one of his later experiments, which he includes the analysis for things created during those experiments. You can see a 0.1 of a millimeter, that's a 100 micron thin palladium wire made into a 1 millimeter loop and then twisted. And he does some pulses of electricity through there, but with a high speed camera and a macro or a microscopic objective, he films the bubbles, but then he turns off the light. And what you see on that 1 millimeter loop of 0.1 millimeter thickness of palladium is exactly the same structures you see in the Henke and Vega experiments when we've got a wire of, say, tungsten and the little hemispheres of ball on there. They're in the electrolysis cold fusion experiment. They are literally the same thing. So you need to, they will make and they will hang around whether you like it or not. But if you do not break them, you will not be able to yield all of the matter that they produce, and you will not be able to yield all the electrons. When you break these structures, they throw out 10 kiloelectron volt electrons, which means you need to account for that. But hopefully they've synthesized more, either by taking light and other photonic, energy, or other matter, and reorganizing that and producing more electrons, or by capturing electrons or whatever from the environment and giving you a net gain in the amount of electrons you have. But if you don't break them, they will just ultimately destroy your apparatus. So you need to work in that sweet spot where you're getting over unity, okay, in your system. And I suspect you can get in. I think there's rumors that at Edwards Air Force Base they replicated an idea of Ken Shoulders, and I think it produced at least a COP of 10, but it might have been, I think it's a 10,000 or 1,000, but certainly it's, whenever you get over one, it's going to be basically infinite. So it doesn't really matter. But let's say it's 10. That's easily doable. Um, the relic neutrinos are a superfluid, and they're universe wide. Background neutrinos, as the Russians like to call them. Um, yes, Stuart is saying, could two ultrasonic transducers either side a quartz tube with a water in it work? You don't really need two. You just need a flat side on the other side. I mean, yeah, you've got to be careful that the load of the material that the transducer is putting sound into is matched to the horn of the transducer. Otherwise, if it's not a 95% or more transmission of energy into the working fluid, then you're going to end up with the transducers destroying themselves over time. So Manuel Castello says, how can I use this in biochem med? Well, you can create new bioavailable elements. Sam McKinney says, exactly, let's not too be greedy. One's enough. Yeah, one over unity, yes. This image is really all about the destructive nature of the yang force, and that the female must harness and manipulate the yang force in order that it goes out and brings in resources such that the yin can condense those resources into new life. So, as I like to say, the woman is the ultimate destroyer because it controls the man. It's the ultimate creator through creative destruction, or creativity through destruction, order out of chaos. Ken Pratt, Bob, ballpark timing for Arduino control. Honestly, you could get some, like, in a traditional Ken Shoulder's reactors were very small. They were very small. That's how you need to think of these things. Get something working very small, right? Because if you're making big, there's too much variability, right? There's too many different thermal gradients on everything, right? And you change the temperature of something and all the parameters change, right? So it's easy to control something that's small. So I don't know, a very small sapphire tube or quartz tube. And then you need to do what Parkhomov did. He had the central tube, but Parkhomov learned very early on. I went to the All Russia Plasma Physics Institute in North Moscow in February 2015 when I went to visit Parkhomov. And they showed me this tube, and it had been running a Parkhomov fuel-based experiment. And they had a swage lock on the end, something that Alan Goldwater, my colleague, developed. And it had hydrogen pressure going in. They said, what do you think of this? Right? And they took a lighter and they lit it, and all of these jets came out. And so the whole thing was perforated with micron-sized holes. At the time, I didn't have a clue, because that was 2015. It wasn't until later that, because no one was talking about it in the cold fusion field, that I came across Ken Shoulders. It was only later. And then I found that Ken Shoulders had shown that these Zodiac vacuum objects could bore through alumina and leave these vitrified channels, and that the thing was fluidized without it being hot, because you could put beeswax on top, and when it hit the beeswax, it would just put a few atom thick layer of aluminium oxide underneath the beeswax, and the beeswax is melting at less than 60 degrees C. So it's not thermal. It's not thermal what's going on. The electron properties are changing, and it's being caught up in this structure and being shifted. Okay, so you need to think small with these things and not over-energize them. Okay, and so what Parkhomov did to get around these things, he would have a central tube where the reactants were, and then he would have a much bigger tube, and he would literally have silicon in this long tube with the little tube in the middle. The long tube, he would have silicon, and then he would put a hypodermic syringe and just inject a bit of hydrogen, okay, into the outer tube. Then it didn't matter if things were coming out of the central tube and perforating it, because they were going into the overall environment around it, okay? I think in his later reactors, the actual tungsten wire was a major part of the fuel, with the little micro machines being born in the core with the nickel and the hydrogen. And you can use what they did in the 1930s, I think, or 1940s in vacuum cells. You can use a form of something to produce hydrogen. They use titanium hydride. You just need a little bit in that. And in these old vacuum cells, they would have a little filament, and they would heat the titanium hydride up, and it would emit a little bit of hydrogen. You wouldn't need to have hydrogen, injected in there. Okay, and then once you've got this little reactor with your nickel and your target, and maybe a magnetic field around there to manipulate whether you want more light or more electrons, you then just have a little thing that changes the you need whatever you need. You need an incredibly fast rise of the current, a very small pulse duration on the disruptive discharge, and I've got a video where I show the Bloomline capacitor that was built by George Hathaway in Toronto and used by Ken Shoulders for his experiments. And so it's a Bloomline capacitor, but a similar system that maybe could be made electronically or with a flyback transistor, a transformer or something that would produce a very fast rise time, controlled current level, and then grow it and then hit it with another pulse. So you need these periodic pulses, which are to make and break them. And in the intervening time, you need to keep them excited and let them get to a point where they can feed themselves. And then it's just working out that duty cycle. And it'd be a case of like, does it work? Does it work? Yes, it does. Flyback transformer, yes. Yeah, the sort of thing that we used on these spark plugs, FPV Angel, the microwave um, diode. Great CB key, wahoo. I'm 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 giving this to you guys so that you can go out and use your ingenuity. Play safe, play small, wear safety gear, keep your distance. But I think together we can crack this nut very, very quickly. And it's a generalized solution. Cavitation is less controllable, and it's a much more macro scale effect. And that's for big bulk thermal heating. But we want to have systems that use this, and I believe that over the last several years, we have found a system that can both do 0 point energy, vacuum fluctuation capture, photon capture. It can do monopole-based baryonic matter decay, aggregation of relic neutrino condensates, and clusters thereof released from ordinary matter. And it's basically the God's toolbox. That's what it is. It's the God's toolbox with a little g. Um, One of the reasons I got into this is because war has often been, these adventures of war have often come about because of trying to capture resources, be that mineral, but most often energy. And it's often the people with the most energy resources that actually have the capability to fight a hard fight. If we take energy out of the equation, in terms of a thing that people need, and there's always some way of restricting it, then, as I argued the other week, I don't believe it's going to lead to a dystopian world. I believe that with the right amount of energy available, you can make sure there's no pollutants going into the environment. Like, people have a digester in the bottom of their sink, a macerator, like you get in some toilets. You've got to imagine it like that, but for toxic materials, where it just returns it to ordinary elements that are bioavailable. turn that glass and those waste aluminium cans into products, and the concrete into recyclable products, there's none of this dumping and fly tipping and stuff, because there's almost no excuse. Like you make, because it's all because of the cost of doing it, and the cost is underpinned by the cost of the energy to do it. So like if we remove that from the equation, then we could have a glorious future. The future is very bright. So I've not done the pipe PVC experiments. No, I might do that a bit of a laugh when it's warmer next year, when I'm back up at the forest house. But like, you know, you've got to decide which you're going to spend your time. Today, I'm doing a very rough presentation as a preamble, so I get the points that I have already written in this document out, so that I can't be accused of thinking about them because someone else said something to me. Okay, it's quite late and I'm going to have a long meeting tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rerun through the formula, as it were, the not the 22 points, but the 12 points. Of course, it would be 12. Right. Uh, okay, I'll read through the abstract first. I'll just read it straight, and then I'll read the 12 points. All energy, chemical, nuclear, etc., is a reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum. The Casimir effect is a simple example of this process in action. When you condense or cohere sound, light, or matter, it distorts less of the physical vacuum and energy is released. This could be in the form of lower frequency photons that can be thermalized, or others that can be utilized photoelectrically, or more condensed matter, such as electrons, that can be directly harvested, or higher binding energy nuclei, or low energy neutrinos or clusters thereof with kinetic energy that can be thermalized or used in subsequent particle-based nuclear reactions. The formation of higher binding energy is result of condensation. To understand this, consider that plasma, gas, liquid, and solid matter are all considered condensed matter. However, as you move from plasma to gas, gas to liquid, liquid to solid, at each stage, energy must be given up as the matter condenses. Now, consider if you had a method to convert dark energy or ultra-high frequency vibrations in the physical vacuum into photons, then photons into background relic neutrinos, and then background relic neutrinos into ordinary matter. At each stage of condensation, there would be a reduction in the distortion of the physical vacuum, and energy would be released in a form that may be accessible in the physical world in which we live. To manifest from the practically infinite energy that surrounds us, we need a method to focus, cohere, and condense energy in all its forms to a more condensed state in order to distort the physical vacuum less, such that technologically useful energy and matter forms are produced. The structure that manifests itself as natural ball lightning is the prototype of the tool that permits this process. This author has established, by way of experiment, observation, and synthesis of a wide array of third-party observations, that when the physical vacuum and or the elementary inductor capacitor LC dipoles, that is background/relic neutrinos, experience extreme magnetohydrodynamic shear and polarization, it leads to the formation of vacuum currents that self-organize into fractal toroidal electrodynamic structures that possess a fractal toroidal moment, FTM. These FTMs produce torsional beams in the physical vacuum that interact with anapole and toroidal moment bearing matter. The FDM is able to produce fractal topological monopole structures, the phase singularities of which can cohere and condense photons, elementary LC dipoles, and all forms of dark and visible matter. The phase singularity results in a magnetic core that ultimately no matter or light can resist, and the overall structure bears a gravitational azimuth that leads to further clustering of similar structures until matter can be gravitationally collapsed. The result is any remaining trapped energy is ultimately recycled. It is this author's hypothesis that all novel energy systems and life itself, including non-traditionally considered forms of life like Earth, other planets, stars, plasma clouds, etc., use this process of net negative entropy yin to live. The structures have yang forms which are necessary to keep overall balance in our universe. I'll skip the 22 points. With the above understanding, technologies employing this ultimate tool of nature to produce energy effectively must first initiate structures, keep them constrained and charged as they are energized to a point where they are self-feeding. They must be allowed to self-feed for long enough that they produce a net gain when harvested, but not so much that they aggregate and ultimately destroy the apparatus they are stored within. Their binding energy is higher than ordinary matter, and their internal fields can exceed that of chemical bonds and disrupt nuclei and their substructures. Do not expect to be able to contain overdriven structures. The technology must therefore disrupt them before they become neutral and uncontrollable, or before they aggregate into clusters that either consume or otherwise disrupt containment, or catastrophically dishevel into fragments that may be themselves neutral, thus leaving their containment, or sufficiently active enough to penetrate the containment and lead to failure modes such as perforation. To use this technology in systems that will be stable and practical. 1. Correct reactants, a source of hydrogen and oxygen is desirable. 2. A containment structure. For instance, if controlled well, the core would be a sapphire or quartz tube, but more preferably it will be clear covalent ceramic. 3. A means to have electrical, laser or physical, that is sound or impulse impacts per atom of over 5 electron volts for hydrogen through to lithium to yield the base magnetotoroelectrical radiation, that is clusters of relic neutrinos, that are already embedded in ordinary matter and are the hidden energy within matter. 4. A means to energize and aggregate the resulting mix, preferably standing waves, phase conjugated, of sound, phonons or photons. 5. A source of free electrons to enable charging of the magnetotoroelectrical radiation so that they can be contained. 6. Additionally, a means of providing extra electrons by way of the photoelectric effect. 7. A passive means of containment such as a ceramic that will get charged by emitted electrons. 8. A means of disruption which could be a subsequent electrical, that is disruptive discharge, laser or proxy electrical, that is sound or phonon shockwave, to destroy them. 9. A duty cycle between initiation and growth to disruption that allows for a net self-accumulation period where more energy or matter is captured from the environment or released from binding energy in matter transformation than is needed to initiate and grow the structures from the whole system. 10. A means of capturing and utilizing traveling substructures that go neutral or are able to travel through the core containment. A secondary material such as lithium or potassium fluoride or others containing lighter spin nuclides that are known neutron absorbers, or paramagnetic materials with high conductivity such as aluminium or tungsten, again encased in a graphite or ceramic might suffice. Ceramic, preferably boron nitride. 11. Substructures remaining in the reactor core will need to be accounted for by continually adjusting the stimulation and destruction cycle, as they will allow for faster aggregation to functionally beneficial clusters. And 12, applying a controlled magnetic field configuration to the core may allow for more photonic than electronic yield from the apparatus. Okay, so there we go. That's your look at that. And there we go. All right. I'll take a couple of last questions. Thank you to Vanilla Isis for the coffee, for the super chat. That's very kind of you again. Thank you to Miki Avila. Thank you. That's very kind. What can we do to help? When I publish the paper, it will have no references. It'll just be basically what I read out today. Maybe I'll bother spell checking it, because I only wrote it in about an hour yesterday and on the train up to the airport today. But you guys are tooled up. You know almost all of the references I'm talking to. So just every time you hear a reference, go and look for the reference, find the reference, and dump the link into the chat. And then I can, it'll save me some time. That would be helpful. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, good. Enjoy your tinkering. Yeah, I've got lots of videos that I took of the Armstrong electrostatic boiler. And at some point I will sketch out my design for a technological modern version of it. And then this will feed into some other technologies that we're working on. That would be fantastic, yes. Carmen Miller says, come on the Egypt trip with us next November. That's the plan. Thank you, Odd1X. It's very kind of you. WP for Truth. I don't know if you're going to join us in Canada. I don't know if you've set that up. I've been rather engaged. Okay, so just close out now. This was O-Day Make and Break. Only take what you need. Don't push it too hard, like anything in life. And the universe is both yin and yang. It's male and female. And in a life-giving universe, we need to work to feed the yin force. They are the ultimate destroyer. The man is but the tool that enables the production of life at our plane of existence. But the yin-yang is through all a nature. It's everywhere. And I do believe that the sun, earth, moon, stars, plasma, black holes, they're all forms of life. We are able to manipulate them because we are able to create in our own minds toroidal moments. And it is an incredible gift to be connected in that way to the way the universe works. It must be respected. My name is Bob Greenier. This is 19th of November 2024. Buenas noches, dobranoc. Good night.